All right, it's time to check in with another Big Ten West program with a new head coach. Almost half the programs in the Big Ten West with a new coach, and it's Nebraska. Mike Schaefer, Husker247, joining us now. Mike, thanks for having us. And man, I've been talking to you a lot here recently because Illinois all of a sudden hitting up the Cornhusker State in recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, two commits in the state. That's going to be like an all-time high for the last I don't know how many decades.
100
Yeah,
years. They haven't had a Nebraska guy in 100 years, Mike.
yeah. Well, so there you go, and maybe this is the start of a new effective pipeline for him. I'm kind of doubting it, but I don't know if you feel the same way with Illinois. Obviously, a much more populous state than Nebraska would be, but it has felt to me in recent years, states like Nebraska, Iowa, ones like that have produced more and more D1 Power 5 players. And I don't know if it's because Big Ten West teams are just more comfortable taking players from those regions and basically deciding that, a mid 3-star in Nebraska is equivalent to what they're getting out of Florida, and they don't have to probably worry about the transfer portal, by day 3 with some of those guys. It's sort of fascinating. It leads to what could be a larger conversation for someone much smarter than me about what's kind of happening in the Midwest. But I'm curious if you've noticed that as well, because I feel like Nebraska's last 2 staffs have really pushed harder into the Midwest than what they were doing under Riley and at times Bellini.
Yeah, it's interesting because Illinois under Lovie Smith was so reliant on Florida and Texas. I mean, you got to recruit Illinois. There's too many
Mm-hmm.
prospects here, but this staff has gone back into Ohio, into Michigan, but in Minnesota,
Yep.
Nebraska, Iowa, as you're talking about, Missouri a little bit
It's a
more.
Big Ten footprint.
Yeah, so I'm wondering that because you make a good point about the transfer portal. I don't know if I've done the research on this, but it does feel like the farther away from home, the easier it
Yep.
is to enter that transfer portal. Let's start in recruiting. Matt Rhule is killing it in recruiting. Top 20 class right now. Is really owning the state of Nebraska. I know Caleb Pyfrom coming to Illinois was a little bit of a shocker, and Illinois goes and gets Tanner Hollinger, who Nebraska looked at but didn't offer because they got the top kid in Nebraska at tight end. But what has he done? Like, why has he been so successful in the recruiting trail so far?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting with Rule. They've done it on a couple different fronts. Like they had a period of time in June where they had all of these camps, and at least here, as long as I've been covering Nebraska recruiting, the recruiting camps do not tend to yield a lot of guys that show up and then earn offers. And he offered, I think, like 6 players from his camp and ended up with 5 of those as commits, maybe 6. I'd have to go back and look, and then a satellite guy as well. And so there was a really sort of interesting period in there where they went after a lot of these evaluation types that we hadn't even really heard their names until they were, letting us know they were coming into camp. And then you look and it's like, oh, okay, this kid, Jake Peters, is from Iowa. He's got a handful of offers here. Okay, this kid from Kansas doesn't have any offers. This kid from Colorado doesn't have any offers. And then Nebraska's like right there offering them. And it makes you wonder, like, okay, what are they seeing? So they obviously believe really strongly sort of in their evaluation. And I think they want a lot of hands-on evaluation if they can get it. I think they would like more and more recruits to come to their camp. So that portion in the middle of June was sort of fascinating. But then baked around that, they had done a really nice job since getting here in December, really highlighting about 15 key guys that they wanted to go hard after. And I would say they probably got about half of those, which is a pretty good percentage in recruiting anymore.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, kind of stemmed from getting the flip of Daniel Kalen from Missouri to Nebraska. He's a quarterback in their class. He's a Bellevue West guy, which is in Nebraska. But the Huskers went hard after Dylan Raiola, and so that kind of changed the timeline a little bit. But as soon as Daniel Kalen ended up in the class, he became a very effective peer recruiter. He got really involved with guys like Carter Nelson, their highest rated guy in the class, another Nebraska kid. Kids like Ja'Cory Barney, Preston Tamua, the Hawaiian offensive lineman they just picked up, a top 247 guy. So they've benefited from having a good peer recruiter who ended up in the Elite 11, finished in the top 11 for the Elite 11. So I think that, Matt Rhule kind of had a good plan going in. They've had to adjust where they've needed, and then they picked up some sort of effective peer recruiters. And they have that new car smell. I mean, if we're being honest, like generally your first 2 full cycles with a new coaching staff, you really get to sell the idea of we're going to be the group that comes in and turns this around. And Jeremy, you may not believe this, but I've heard that several times here recently under several different head coaches. And I don't know if it's starting to hit me the same way as I did the first time I heard it when Mike Riley was Nebraska's head coach. As someone who's also gone through a sea of coaching changes in doing this job, I'm sure you're familiar with that line.
Yeah, which is, you want to see it before you believe it, right? Which is why Brett Bielema actually winning some games is made you believe it a little bit. But let's start there, Mike. Nebraska football is the thing in that state, but they haven't made a bowl game since 2016. The last time they finished in the top 25 was 2013 to end the season. Locally, what has this decade done to change about how that program is viewed in Nebraska and Lincoln?
Well, there's definitely a reeky, musk of desperation around everything that happens with Nebraska football, and so I sort of jokingly live in fear of the idea that they go 6-6, just how ridiculous people are going to be over their skis for that 2024 season. But at the same time, it'd be nice to see a Nebraska team go 6-6. Something I never thought I would actually say out loud, but here we are. It's been difficult, I think, for people to kind of size this up. And, they largely had been 2004, 2007, they didn't make bowl games. Every other year since 1962, from 2016 to 1962, they missed 2 bowl games. From 2017 to 2022, they didn't make a bowl game. Like it's hard to put into words for a fan base that, largely built itself as to January 1, Nebraska's in the Orange Bowl, Nebraska's in this, Nebraska's in that. And now it's like they can't even get into the December 27th Las Vegas Bowl. They can't get to the Little Caesars Pizza Bowl up in Detroit. I used to joke for years that New York City would do backflips if they could put Nebraska in the Pinstripe Bowl. They can't because they don't win 6 games, but they want to. And I know they badly want to put them in that bowl game. But so it's been difficult. You have people that, there's Caleb Piper, for example, Illinois' offensive lineman they picked up out of Nebraska, and Tanner Hollinger, same thing. If you do the math on this, those guys would have been, 10, 11 years old the last time Nebraska had a winning season? And like around here, it's an expectation if you're an in-state kid and you get an offer, well, then you must have been dreaming about Nebraska football your whole life. It's really easy for somebody like me that's 35 to understand that concept because when I was 8, Nebraska had already won a national championship and was about to go back-to-back. It's a lot harder to understand why there's an expectation around here that these kids that don't see winning football would just be beholden to Nebraska. And so I think that's one of the biggest things I've noticed over the last 6-7 years is that kids in the state, like, they're interested in going elsewhere because Nebraska football is just another program to them. Because
it reminds me, Mike. It reminds me. Sorry to interrupt. It reminds me of Illinois basketball.
I think that's a good example. Indiana basketball too. Same thing.
Yeah, after 2005, everyone's thinking, oh, this is the program's going to take off, and obviously they didn't keep recruiting that way. And after a decade of losing, like those kids grew up, Illinois is not relevant. It's kind of the same thing. It feels like with Nebraska football.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair comparison.
Well, Mike, big question here. Matt Rhule, I think everyone thinks is a great hire based on what he did at Baylor, based on what he did at Temple. Obviously didn't work well in the NFL, but he's proven to be a really good college coach. But is he taking over a rebuild? Is this job a rebuild?
No, I don't think so. So one of the things that's been hard for people to accept is that both Mike Riley and Scott Frost had more than enough talent to win 6 or 7 games every year that they were here, if not more. I look at that 2021 team where you have like a half dozen starters that are like 23 years or older. Like they had grown men in their program. And you guys understand this at Illinois because they sort of built it similar where these last couple of years with the extra COVID year, you have grown men in your program. Like guys that have been in the program for years, they should know how to go out, complete what it is that they're supposed to do. The system hasn't changed over. The coaches have been the same. And they couldn't take advantage of that. Why? Because the head coach just wasn't good enough in game. I mean, Nebraska's like Sunday through Friday was pretty good all the time in terms of, I think they had fine enough assistant coaches. I think that they largely had, the talent on their roster. They didn't have surefire NFL guys. Like, it's been a while since Nebraska's really been an NFL factory. That's kind of one of the things that's, precipitated their run to the bottom of this conference. But they've had guys that are good enough to go win games in the Big Ten West. And if you go look at how many close games they lose, a lot of it is they just keep giving games away by doing the same dumb stuff that they were doing in year 2 under Scott Frost that they were still doing in year 5.
The one thing I would argue, Mike, is they shouldn't have been as many close games either, right?
Yeah.
Like that's part of the coaching.
Well, they found ways to, if they got off to a hot start. I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen Nebraska blow a 17, 16, 14-point, 13-point lead. Like, often, they're up 13-0 against Purdue in 2019, and they lose that game to then walk on Aiden O'Connell's first ever career performance as he's the third string quarterback to get thrusted into that game with 2 minutes left. And he calmly leads them right down a drive, and they win that game against Nebraska's defense. Like, I mean, there's so many examples of this. And a lot of it is I just don't think Scott Frost was a good game day coach. Yeah. They recruited fine. Like, the talent that they have on this roster relative to the rest of the Big Ten West, which, I don't want to besmirch anything here, but it's not a particularly good division. Like, there's very few times you look at a team when Nebraska's playing another Big Ten West team and you think, oh, that is that's a top 15 team. That's a top 10 roster. No, I mean, they have a comparable roster with these teams. They just don't do the small things. I mean, they're not good at special teams. They're not good, preventing turnovers. They're bad at getting off the field on third down. All the little things that Illinois flipped pretty quickly under Brett Bielema are all the things that Scott Frost could never do in 5 years. They didn't have a team built to be successful in the Big Ten. They had a team that thought that it was going to be the wide open AAC. That's why I'm fascinated by what Wisconsin's going to be under Luke Fickell. I don't care that he has experience in the Big Ten Conference. Like, it's a totally different ball game playing against Illinois than SMU. Like, I don't know why this is difficult for people to pick up, but you see these AAC coaches, they go to different conferences, they struggle almost immediately. Like, it's a totally different style. And you understand this, like, I'll use this example for basketball. It took Brad Underwood, 2.5 years to finally kind of adjust to Big Ten style of basketball relative to the wide open Big 12. Fred Hoiberg, same thing. Like, he's had to adjust the style that he wants to play because it's not what he could do when he was at Iowa State. It's not what Brad Underwood could do at Oklahoma State. Scott Frost was almost unwilling to do that, to the point that when they finally made a change, they went out and they got Mark Whipple, and they wanted to go be a just throw it 50 times a game offense with no offensive line. Like, none of their decisions made any sense, and they didn't make any sense in the moment. And if you tried to point this out, you'd be drowned out by, oh, you got to give him time. Oh, he won a national championship here. He's going to get it figured out. If Scott Frost can't do it, nobody can do it. Like, people really just talk themselves into things, and the evidence is right there in front of your face every Saturday. Like, your record often indicates who you are. And no matter how many Twitter graphics go around that Nebraska is the greatest 9-loss team in 2021 in football history because they lost 8 one-score games, nobody cares. No. You lost 8 games. Like, win half of those, and you can be the greatest 7-win team in college football history. And nobody would still care, except around here, because 7 wins is now a mythical number that nobody's seen in a while. So that's kind of a long rant, but yeah, I like it. They were bad on the field, and all these excuses just kept getting made for it.
Yeah, I've made plenty of Scott Frost comments in my day, so I don't need to pile on. I think you explained it pretty well. How has Matt
Rhule, like a pinata, everybody gets a whack,
Yeah, and it's easy in hindsight, but just while it was happening, I think
even as it was going on, though, I remember coming onto your show and talking about how going into that 2021 game, like, I didn't feel great about it, because they had so much turmoil happening behind the scenes, and they had never really proven that they could just go out and take care of business. Right. And Illinois showed up that day, and it was very obvious after that bad first quarter for the Illini, they were the better team. It took sort of Adrian Martinez going superhuman in Champaign, which he does for whatever reason, for Nebraska to even have a chance in that game.
Mm-hmm. How has Matt Rhule impacted the program then? I know we haven't played any games yet, but just inside the program, around the program, how does it feel different?
You probably feel similar to this when you've seen the coaching changes. A lot of times the teams sort of take on a similar personality to their head coach. And you get that a lot with how they talk. And so you hear different phrases that Matt Rhule would use that you're hearing from the players. They're talking about, you know, that they're trying to get the 2% better each day, that they're trying to do, you know, these sorts of things, that they've got to walk before they can, you know, run, or all of that. So they're speaking in sort of the language that indicates that everybody in the program is familiar, that they're not coming from a place where the expectation is that they're going to be ready made, that they have to sort of work into that and earn it. And so I think he's instilled some confidence there. I mean, Ethan Piper will represent Nebraska at Big Ten Media Days, and I'm not sure that he's going to be a starter on the offensive line, but I think he'll play. But one of the reasons he's going to represent Nebraska is that I thought in the spring he had one of the most telling interviews. And this is a local kid who grew up, you know, dreamed about playing for Nebraska, and he would be the first to tell you that through 21 and 22, it was just a miserable experience. Like, there wasn't joy to be found in that locker room. The guys weren't, if you're not enjoying what you're doing and you're having to go there every day, and then you're kind of getting the crap kicked out of you when you go play these other teams, like that's a tough spot to, you know, spark a turnaround. And so I think that will be sort of the mouthpiece representation of how the players felt, you know, under the end of Scott Frost, and then sort of the reinvigoration you get when someone shows up and he's talking differently and he's treating you differently and he's got, you know, different ideas. I mean, Matt Rhule has definitely won the offseason, which, you know, Nebraska's record in the offseason is tremendous. But I think that he is going to have a good impact for them from a mental standpoint on Saturdays. And he's a veteran coach. I mean, there's a big difference between getting a guy at his second stop who's really only kind of known a few things in his career versus someone who's had to sort of bounce around a lot and really has had to do it without the sort of resources that Nebraska benefits him with now.
So they get some big transfers, especially offensively. Georgia Tech quarterback Jeff Sims. We've seen Virginia wide receiver Billy Kemp was great 2 years ago in Virginia when Illinois got crushed there. Georgia tight end Eric Gilbert, former 5-star prospect, hasn't kind of played that way on the field, but they have their 6th OC in 6 years, I believe it is, for Nebraska. What do you expect out of them offensively?
Yeah, it's tough because if you go back and you look at what Baylor did in 2018 and 2019, I mean, there was a lot of trying to set things up for play action through running the football. You didn't get a lot of quarterback run game, but Charlie Brewer could kind of move if he needed to. And I think Jeff Sims, who's a better athlete, could certainly run more, but I think he's more of a guy who's going to run if pressured than he is, you know, unlike Adrian, where you're maybe running him 15 times a game and 10 of those are designed and 5 are scrambles. With Jeff Sims, it could be like 7 times a game and maybe 2 are designed and 5 are scrambles. So we don't have a great grasp on what exactly this offense is going to look like. They're going to use a lot of tight ends right now because I don't think their wide receiver room, they're super comfortable with what they have there. They have a lot of names, but they don't have a lot of, you know, great returning production. So I think you could see them really kind of stack the line of scrimmage. You could see them try to play through a defense, that kind of thing. I mean, I think you're going to see them act more like a traditional Big Ten West football team than certainly they have in the previous 5 years, because I think a lot of it is they want to try to eliminate some of those turnovers. They want to try to win field position. I know special teams is more of an emphasis now than it has been in the past. And it's hilarious to say these things out loud, but these are a lot of why they lost so many games. Just bad decisions and bad performances in key areas of the game. So I think with the offense, I would look for them to try to run the ball, set it up the pass a little bit with the play action. Billy Kemp is probably the biggest name to know. I don't know if he was in your rundown there, but he was one of the better receivers at Virginia for the past few years. I could see Jeff Sims really kind of targeting him a lot. Nebraska the last couple of years has had pretty good luck out of the transfer portal with wide receivers. I kind of think Billy Kemp could be the next one of those.
Where Nebraska's really struggled, feels like, as you mentioned, kind of trying to do this spread open thing in the Big Ten West, be different. Got to have good line play, and they just haven't had great line play. Are they better in the trenches? What do you expect out of them, both on the offensive and defensive lines?
It's going to be almost verbatim the same, nearly 3 or 4 of the same guys Illinois has seen the last couple of years. But the hope is they went out and they got a transfer in Ben Scott, who is a multi-year starter at Arizona State. He's going to be in the middle of the offensive line at center. It's been a good offseason for a guy like Bryce Benhart, who's been a little up and down, but is a former top 100 recruit. And this staff feels like he's a Sunday guy. Nori Nuili is a former Colorado State transfer that was at Nebraska that started the back half of 2021 and then missed all of 2022 because he was suspended. So he's going to be back and he'll hold down one of the guard spots. Turner Corcoran's a top 50 player from the 2020 class that hasn't quite played like it. Teddy Prohaska is a guy who's basically started 4 games, but is viewed as the franchise cornerstone left tackle because he had a really good half against Aiden Hutchinson before he tore his ACL in 2021. So they have pieces, but make no mistake, Jeremy, they were the worst offensive line in the country last year. You couldn't find a worse offensive line. They brought back the same offensive line coach, and 4 of the 5 pieces will be the exact same as what they've had for 2 years. The difference is, will they have an offense that is called to hide some of their weaknesses instead of what we saw under Mark Whipple, where it's like, I know you guys can't pass block, but we got to throw this to Trey Palmer. So do whatever you can for 2.5 seconds. And sorry, Casey Thompson, but you're probably going to be, in that blue medical tent a lot. And that's what it was. I mean, that was their entire strategy last year. And to be fair, at times when it worked, it allowed them to stay in games. I felt like they had a chance to beat Illinois last year, prior to Casey Thompson going out. And then when Chubba Purdy came in, there was no chance. It's hard to say what this offensive line is going to be, but I can't imagine it'll be as bad as last year, but I'm not willing to say they're going to be average either. So slight improvement, but what that means overall is tough to say.
Yeah, I think that's got to be their biggest step in the next couple of years to be competitive in this conference. Defensively, they allowed 27 or more points in 5 of the last 6 years. They bring in Syracuse DC Tony White. What do you expect there?
Yeah, so it's going to be really this is what's fascinating. I couldn't tell you much about what's going to happen on offense. On defense, the best I can tell you is that if you're familiar with Rocky Long's kind of storied career throughout college football, and he was always a guy that was going to match his pieces to whatever was happening on the offense. It's kind of what we're going to see at Nebraska. And Tony White had a lot of success with this at Syracuse. And I don't know that it's going to happen overnight for Nebraska, but they have a lot of interesting pieces. I think one of the things that has kind of happened is in the Midwest, you get a lot of sort of tweener type players, and you don't know how to utilize those when you're trying to line them up on a defensive line. But maybe in certain situations, if you have 3 down linemen, you have a guy who can overhang as an outside linebacker, but would normally be a defensive end, but isn't going to hold up, 60 snaps doing that. I think they're trying to utilize sort of those tweener type players and get more speed on the field and see if that helps where they sort of struggled in the past. I mean, it's unclear how this is going to hold up if a team just chooses to go straight at them on every single play. You still got to have those big guys up front that can, eat up space on your defensive line. And that's going to be an area that's somewhat in question, but they return a lot of players on defense. They brought in some interesting transfers. They were young last year, which was part of the issue that they faced in terms of getting stops. I mean, so it's hard to know how quickly they can get this thing revved up, but they're going to be sort of a chaos defense. So if they give up a big play, the idea being if you give up the big play, you were going for a big play on your own, So they didn't force a lot of turnovers under Eric Shenander's defense previously with Nebraska. And I think the idea under Tony White is to be far more disruptive, even if that means you're going to give up the occasional bust.
2023, what is a successful year for Matt Rhule in his first year?
6-6, 7-5 would be really, really well received. I think 5-7 would be a pretty big bummer. Anything less than 5 wins is going to get a lot of grousing from people. And the thing is, you're getting a Colorado team that could be a giant mess. I think that Minnesota game to start with is more of a toss-up than the 8-point line that it's currently sitting at, because this is a Minnesota team that's, really going to start over for the first time. Where the schedule gets really tough, though, after those first 4 games, back-to-back games with Michigan and Illinois, 2 teams that are just going to try to beat you up and take your lunch money. That Illinois game comes 6 days after they played Michigan, and it's on the road at a place where they really haven't played well in years. So the key stretch is going to be, they have, I think, a 3 or a 4 game stretch in there that includes Northwestern, Purdue, Michigan State, and Maryland. And so if they can somehow split that, I think they've got a chance of getting to 6-6 or 7-5. I don't know what Iowa and Wisconsin are going to be. Those games generally are going to be close regardless. I think almost every game they play in the Big Ten West is going to be close. I don't know how you view this division this year, Jeremy, but I think it's pretty open in terms of there's no great team. And there's, with maybe the exception of Northwestern and everything they have going on, there's no team that you're going to pencil in for a guaranteed X amount of losses either.
Yeah, I think the variance for a lot of these teams, like I think Iowa's probably got the highest floor just because their defense.
Yep.
I
They
feel
have
like
the one thing. Yep.
Yeah, I feel like when their special teams are really good, but like Wisconsin, I could see them winning 6 games or 10 games. I'm with you. I don't know if their defense is good anymore, which is weird. I do think Fickle and his staff are good, but that's a big change. There's a lot of change happening there. Illinois has got big questions at quarterback and in the secondary. Purdue's going through huge changes. Minnesota, I feel is really solid. They're going through huge changes. So I'm with you. I don't think Nebraska is a team I would consider as a contender, but I can see them as a bowl team, and I can see 5 or 6 teams as bowl teams.
I think Nebraska is the type of team, and I think it'll be the type of season that'll be pretty up and down where, maybe they get off to that 4-0 start and people feel really good. And then you kind of get bashed in by Michigan. You drop a game to Illinois. You start to feel bad. You beat Northwestern. You feel good. You lose to Purdue. You feel bad. Like, I think it's going to be kind of because it's hard to imagine this team is going to be consistent when you're talking new coach, new quarterback, new offensive system, new defensive system. They have 42 new scholarship players on their roster. Like it's hard to have an expectation of consistency. And so if they can just sort of survive and just get to that 5 or 6 win total in early November, then the rest is going to kind of be, okay, let's see how they match up with teams that are perceived to be, especially with Iowa, perceived to be the best in your division. So I just think it's going to be a really muddled Big Ten West. Like 8-4 strikes me as the winner here.
Yeah, I think we would agree. Like the winner of this division's at best 7-2, probably.
Yeah, at best. Like best. I could see a pile up of 6-3s,
Yeah.
And I think that's fair. And I also think it illustrates why divisions are going away after this year. Like it's just I don't know how people in Illinois feel about it. I know Nebraska fans are upset because it was their ticket to glory. Yeah. You just need that one shining season and then you could be right there. But I hate it.
It was an easier thing. But like you think you're Penn State. Like Penn State's gonna be sitting there like if we were in the West, we would have been in how many Big Ten championship games, and we don't even get a chance at this. So I think it's the fair way of doing things. But I will miss the wild Big Ten West, Mike.
Yeah, I will miss having the certainty of who you're gonna see every year. But I am pretty excited for the new look Big Ten in 2024.
Mike Schaefer, Husker247. Great breakdown, man. Thanks for all the insight on the Huskers.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always appreciate the opportunity to try to chip away at the myths of Nebraska and how they're covered.
One last thing I do have for you.
Yeah.
Tell me that there are more Tominaga jerseys being sold than any Husker football jersey.
There was a brief moment. It lasted for probably about a month where Tominaga is the most popular person on campus. But then, and I don't know how much you follow softball, Jordy Ball transfers from Oklahoma to Nebraska and is unequivocally the best softball player in the country. Yeah. They sold out season tickets in like 3 minutes for softball. There's a wait list of thousands of people. Here's a dirty secret. There's no wait list for football right now. They're still trying to give away tickets. So it is a whole new era of sports where easily 2 of the 3 most popular players on campus are women athletes. Jazz Shelley for Nebraska basketball would be one of them, Jordan Ball. And then Keisei Tominaga. Like, there's not a football player that would even be considered like on the Mount Rushmore of Nebraska's athletes right now. Like, it's a wild time out here. So Tominaga, there's a lot of love for Tominaga. Nebraska fans hope that this is a tournament team. It's probably more likely an NIT team if we're honest. But that guy is so much fun to watch. It's so much fun to watch.
He's a joy. It says a lot about Nebraska fans too. Like they show up to every sport. There. And they're pretty good.
Fair weather, they want you to win, but if you're winning, they're going to be there and they're going to act like they've been fans their whole life.
Mike Schaefer, thanks, man.
All right, have a good one.